Marcus wiped the grease from his hands with the same stained towel he'd been using for 3 months. The dinner rush at Mel's diner had finally died down, and the kitchen was settling into its familiar after-hours quiet. Pots soaked in murky water, the grill still ticked as it cooled, and the fluorescent lights hummed their tired song above his head. He'd been washing dishes and prepping vegetables at this place for 2 years now, ever since he'd dropped out of community college when his mom got sick. The pay was shit, but it kept the lights on in their trailer park home. He was scraping the last of the burnt cheese from a skillet when he heard it, a sound that cut through the kitchen's mechanical symphony like a knife through butter. Someone was crying. Not the usual frustrated tears of an overwhelmed server during rush hour, but the deep, broken kind of crying that comes from somewhere real and raw. Marcus set down the skillet and listened. The sound was coming from outside, probably near the employee parking lot behind the diner. He glanced around the empty kitchen, then at the clock on the wall, 11:47 p.m. His shift had officially ended 20 minutes ago, but Jimmy, the night manager, was probably already halfway through his second beer in the office, counting tips and pretending to do paperwork. The crying continued, and something in Marcus's chest tightened. He'd heard that sound before, when his mom would sit on their front steps after another failed job interview, trying to hide her tears from him. He couldn't walk past it then, and he couldn't walk past it now. Marcus pushed through the back door of the diner, the cold October air hitting his face like a slap. The parking lot was mostly empty, just Jimmy's rusted Camaro, the cook's motorcycle, and a few cars belonging to the night shift workers at the truck stop next door. But there, under the single working streetlight, he saw her. The new waitress, Sarah he thought her name was, sat on the curb next to what looked like the twisted remains of a bicycle. She had her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with each sob. Her uniform was wrinkled from the long shift, and her blonde hair, which had been pulled back in a neat ponytail at the start of her shift, now hung loose around her face. Marcus had noticed her when she'd started working at Mel's 3 weeks ago. She was different from the usual rotation of waitresses who came and went like seasonal allergies. She actually listened when customers talked, remembered their names, asked about their families. She'd smile at Marcus when she dropped off dirty plates, actually looked him in the eye instead of treating him like part of the kitchen equipment. Now she looked broken. He approached slowly, his work boots crunching on the gravel. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "You okay?" Sarah looked up, her eyes red and puffy. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and tried to pull herself together, the way people do when they're caught being human. "Oh, Marcus, I'm sorry. I didn't know anyone was still here." "Don't apologize," he said, crouching down next to her. "What happened?" She gestured at the bicycle, and Marcus could see the problem immediately. The chain had snapped, but that wasn't the worst of it. The back wheel was bent at an angle that suggested a violent encounter with something much larger and heavier. The derailleur hung like a broken arm, and the handlebars were twisted. "Some asshole in a pickup truck," Sarah said, her voice thick with tears and anger. "I was riding home and he was backing out of the 7-Eleven across the street. Didn't even look, just slammed right into me." She laughed bitterly. "He got out, looked at his truck, which didn't have a scratch on it, and then looked at me sitting in the ditch. You know what he said?" Marcus shook his head. "He said maybe you should get a real job so you can afford a car." Then he just drove off. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He knew that tone, that casual cruelty that some people threw around like confetti. He'd heard it plenty of times himself, from customers who looked right through him, from his high school classmates who'd gone on to college while he'd stayed behind, from his own father before the man had disappeared when Marcus was 14. "Did you call the cops?" Marcus asked. Sarah shook her head. "What's the point? I didn't get his license plate, and look at me. You think they're going to care about some waitress and her busted bike?" She was probably right, and they both knew it. This wasn't the kind of neighborhood where justice came easy, especially not for people like them. Marcus stood up and walked around the bicycle, assessing the damage. The frame was intact, which was something. The front wheel still spun true. But the chain, the derailleur, the back wheel, that was going to be a problem. "How far do you live?" he asked. "About 4 miles, Sarah said, "near the old cotton mill. I was going to call my roommate, but her car's in the shop and I can't afford a cab." 4 miles. In this neighborhood at midnight, that might as well have been 40. Marcus looked at Sarah, then at the bike, then back at Sarah. She was shivering now, from the cold or the shock or both. Her uniform, a powder blue dress with a white apron that had seen better days, wasn't designed for sitting on cold concrete in October. "I can fix this," he said. Sarah looked up at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "The bike. I can fix it." "Well, most of it. Enough to get you home." "Marcus, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," he said, already walking toward the diner's back door. "But I'm going to." He disappeared inside and returned a few minutes later with a small toolbox that he kept in his locker, along with a roll of electrical tape and a wire coat hanger he'd grabbed from the break room. The tools weren't much. A few screwdrivers, some wrenches, a pair of pliers, but they were better than nothing. Marcus knelt beside the bicycle and got to work. The back wheel was the biggest problem. The impact had bent the rim, but not beyond repair. He loosened the wheel nuts and carefully worked the rim back into something resembling round, using the concrete curb as a makeshift anvil. It wasn't perfect, but it would hold. The chain was easier. He'd broken plenty of bike chains as a kid, riding his beat-up Huffy through the trailer park and the woods beyond. He found the broken link, removed it with his pliers, and reconnected the chain. It was shorter now, which meant the bike would only work in the highest gear, but it would work. The derailleur was toast, but Marcus had an idea. He straightened the coat hanger and used it to create a crude chain guide, wrapping it around the rear sprocket and taping it in place. It looked like shit, but it would keep the chain from falling off. As he worked, Sarah sat on the curb and watched. She'd stopped crying, but she hadn't stopped shivering. "Where'd you learn to do this?" she asked. "My dad," Marcus said without looking up. "Before he split, he used to fix bikes for extra cash, had a little setup in our garage, back when we had a garage." "When did he leave?" "When I was 14. Marcus tested the chain tension, adjusting his improvised guide. "Mom got diagnosed with diabetes, needed insulin she couldn't afford. He said he was going to find work in Houston, send money back. That was 8 years ago." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry. Don't be. Some people run when things get hard. Some people stay. You figure out pretty quick which kind you are." Marcus stood up and brushed the grease from his hands. The bike looked like it had been assembled by a drunk mechanic using spare parts from a junkyard, but the wheels turned and the chain stayed on. "Try it," he said. Sarah stood up and swung her leg over the bike. She pushed off gently, wobbling a bit as she got used to the rigid gear ratio, but she stayed upright. She rode a small circle around the parking lot, testing the brakes and the steering. "It works," she said, and there was something like wonder in her voice. "It'll get you home," Marcus said, "but you're going to want to get it properly fixed soon. This is just a band-aid." Sarah rode back to where Marcus was standing and stopped. She got off the bike and before he could step back, wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. She smelled like coffee and French fry oil and something floral. Probably shampoo from that morning when her day had started with hope instead of tears. "Thank you," she said into his shoulder. "You have no idea what this means to me." Marcus stood there, not quite knowing what to do with his hands, feeling the warmth of another person pressed against him. It had been a long time since anyone had hugged him like this, like he mattered, like he'd done something good in a world that usually felt pretty short on good things. When she finally pulled back, Sarah looked up at him with eyes that were still red, but no longer hopeless. "You're the only one who really looks at me here," she said. The words hit Marcus harder than he'd expected. He'd spent 2 years in this kitchen watching servers come and go, watching customers treat the staff like furniture, watching Jimmy count money while complaining about labor costs. Nobody looked at anybody. Not really. They all just moved through their shifts like ghosts haunting the same tired building. But Sarah was right. He did look at her. He'd noticed the way she wrote little thank you notes on customers' checks when they were having a bad day. He'd seen her slip extra bread rolls to the old man who came in every Tuesday and ordered just coffee because it was all he could afford. He'd watched her stay late to help the single mom who worked the morning shift and always looked exhausted. Sarah was good people, and good people were harder to find than bus money in this part of town. "Get home safe," Marcus said. "And if that bike starts acting up, bring it by. I'll be here." Sarah nodded, still looking at him with something that might have been gratitude or might have been something else entirely. "I will," she said. I promise." She got back on the bike and rode slowly toward the street, testing her balance and getting used to the single gear. At the edge of the parking lot, she turned back and waved. Marcus waved back, watching her disappear into the orange glow of the streetlights. He stood there for a few minutes after she was gone, breathing in the cold air and listening to the distant hum of traffic on the interstate. Then he picked up his toolbox and went back inside to finish cleaning up the kitchen. But something felt different now. The fluorescent light seemed less harsh, the humming less monotonous. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he'd done something that mattered. The next day started like any other. Marcus arrived at Mel's at 3 p.m. for the dinner prep shift, tied on his apron, and began the familiar routine of chopping vegetables and setting up his station. The kitchen was its usual chaos of competing conversations, sizzling pans, and radio music that nobody really listened to but everybody heard. But something was different today. Sarah was different. She found him during the first lull between lunch and dinner, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing a smile that seemed to start somewhere deeper than her face. "Peace offering," she said, setting one of the cups on his prep table. "I know you probably drink your coffee black like some kind of psychopath, but I brought sugar packets just in case." Marcus smiled despite himself. He did drink his coffee black, mostly because adding sugar and cream felt like putting on airs. But he appreciated that she'd thought about it. "How's the bike?" he asked, taking a sip. The coffee was good, better than the swill they served customers. Sarah must have made this pot herself. Still ugly as sin, but it got me here this morning without falling apart. I'm calling that a win. She leaned against his prep table, seemingly in no hurry to get back to her section. "I wanted to thank you again. What you did last night, not many people would have stopped. Anybody would have done the same thing," Marcus said. But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Plenty of people would have walked right past, told themselves it wasn't their problem, that they had their own troubles to worry about. "No," Sarah said firmly, "they wouldn't have. Trust me, I've been let down enough times to know the difference." There was something in her voice that suggested a history Marcus didn't know about, stories that probably didn't have happy endings. But before he could ask, Jimmy emerged from the office, clipboard in hand and wearing his perpetual expression of barely contained irritation. "Sarah, Table 6 is asking about their appetizer," he said. "And Marcus, those onions aren't going to prep themselves." Sarah pushed off from the prep table and grabbed her coffee. "Duty calls," she said. "But hey, would you mind if I sat with you during break today? I promise I won't talk your ear off about my life story or anything." Marcus found himself nodding before he'd really thought about it. "Sure. I usually eat out back, though it's not exactly scenic. Better than the break room," Sarah said. "That place smells like defeat and microwaved fish sticks." She wasn't wrong about that. Marcus watched her walk back to her section, moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate around tables and through narrow spaces without thinking about it. She stopped at table 6, a family with 2 young kids who were using their crayons to color the tablecloth instead of their coloring books, and somehow managed to charm them into ordering dessert. The rest of the afternoon passed in its usual blur of orders and prep work, but Marcus found himself looking forward to break time in a way he hadn't in months. Usually, his 30-minute break was just a chance to step outside, smoke a cigarette, and stare at the parking lot while his mind went blank. It wasn't much, but it was the only time during his shift when nobody needed anything from him. At 6:30, Marcus untied his apron and grabbed the brown bag that contained his dinner. A peanut butter sandwich and a banana, same as always. He pushed through the back door and settled onto the concrete step where he usually ate. 5 minutes later, Sarah appeared with her own dinner, a salad that looked suspiciously like something from the menu, which meant she was probably eating at cost instead of for free like the rest of the staff. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "It's a free country," Marcus said, scooting over to make room on the step. Sarah sat down next to him, close enough that he could smell that floral shampoo again. She opened her salad and began picking at it with a plastic fork. "So," she said between bites, "how long have you been working here?" 2 years, Marcus said. "You?" 3 weeks, but it feels like 3 years. Sarah laughed, but there wasn't much humor in it. "I'm not exactly built for food service. I keep forgetting which table ordered what, and yesterday I accidentally charged someone for a steak when they ordered eggs." Jimmy catch you? Oh yeah. He was not pleased. I thought he was going to fire me on the spot. Jimmy's all bark, Marcus said. He's fired me 6 times this month. I'm still here. That's comforting, I guess. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, What did you do before this? Nothing much. Community college for a while, studying business. Had some idea about opening my own restaurant someday. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. Then life happened. Your mom? Marcus nodded. Medical bills ate up my college fund. Then the rent. Then everything else. Turns out insulin costs more than dreams. That's fucked up, Sarah said, and Marcus was surprised by the vehemence in her voice. I mean, really? You shouldn't have to choose between taking care of family and having a future. Is what it is, Marcus said, though hearing someone else say it was fucked up made something loosen in his chest. Most people, when they heard his story, just nodded and changed the subject, like poverty was contagious and they didn't want to catch it. What about you? He asked. What brings you to the glamorous world of late-night diner service? Sarah was quiet for so long that Marcus thought maybe she hadn't heard him. Then she said, I'm hiding. From what? Who? My ex-boyfriend. Turns out when you break up with someone who deals drugs, they don't always take it well. She said it casually, like she was talking about the weather, but Marcus could hear the fear underneath. I was living in Atlanta, had a decent job at a marketing firm. But Derek, when I told him I was done, he made it clear that he didn't consider our relationship over. Started showing up at my work, following me home, calling me at all hours. Jesus. I filed a restraining order. But you know how much good those do when the person violating them doesn't give a shit about the law. Sarah stabbed at her salad with more force than necessary. So I emptied my savings account, got in my car, and drove until I found a place where nobody knew my name. Lucky me, I ended up in scenic Millerville, Georgia, population 4,000 and falling. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and saw things he'd missed before. The way she kept her back to the wall when she sat down. The way her eyes flicked to the parking lot entrance every few minutes. The way she always seemed to be listening for something that might not be there. That why you don't have a car? He asked. Sold it in Valdosta. Figured a guy looking for a blonde in a silver Honda Civic might not look twice at a blonde on a bike. She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that was trying not to be a sob. Joke's on me, I guess. Can't outrun everything. They sat in silence for a while, eating their respective dinners and watching the sun set behind the truck stop across the street. Marcus was trying to think of something to say that wouldn't sound stupid or empty when Sarah spoke again. You know what's funny? In all the time I was with Derek, he never once fixed anything for me. I mean, anything. Light bulb burned out. I had to change it. Garbage disposal stopped working. I had to call a repair guy. Car needed an oil change. I had to figure it out myself. She turned to look at Marcus. But you spent an hour in a parking lot fixing a bike for someone you barely know. Why? The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been asking himself the same thing since last night, and he still didn't have a good answer. Guess I don't like seeing people stuck, he said finally. There's more to it than that. Marcus finished his sandwich and crumpled up the brown bag. Maybe. My mom used to say that the world has 2 kinds of people. The ones who see a problem and walk away, and the ones who see a problem and can't help but try to fix it. She said it was a blessing and a curse, being the second kind. Which do you think it is? Depends on the day. Sarah smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad you're the second kind. They sat there until Jimmy stuck his head out the door and called them back to work. But something had shifted between them. Marcus couldn't name it exactly, but it felt like the beginning of something good. The next few days fell into a rhythm that Marcus hadn't experienced since high school, when he'd had friends and things to look forward to. Every shift, Sarah would find him during the quiet moments, bringing him coffee, asking about his prep work, sharing stories about her more colorful customers. During breaks, she'd sit with him on the back step and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Marcus learned that Sarah was 26, had grown up in a small town outside Savannah, and had gotten a degree in communications that she described as expensive and useless. She'd moved to Atlanta with dreams of working in advertising, maybe starting her own agency someday. Instead, she'd gotten a job at a mid-level marketing firm, writing copy for car dealerships and furniture stores. Not exactly Mad Men, she'd said with a self-deprecating laugh. More like sad men. Sarah learned that Marcus was 22, had never been outside Georgia, and could cook better than anyone else in the diner's kitchen despite officially being just a prep cook and dishwasher. She'd started bringing him ingredients she'd picked up at the grocery store. Nothing fancy, just herbs and spices that weren't in Mel's limited pantry, and asking him to show her how to use them. "I can barely make toast without burning it," she'd confessed. "But watching you work, you make it look like art." Marcus had blushed at that, unused to having his work complimented by anyone other than his mother. On Thursday, Sarah's bike chain snapped again, this time in the diner's parking lot before her shift. Marcus fixed it in 10 minutes, reinforcing his earlier repair with a spare link he'd bought at the hardware store. "I should probably get a new bike," Sarah said, watching him work. "This one's got character," Marcus replied. "Sometimes the broken things that get fixed are stronger than the things that never break in the first place." Is that philosophy or just wishful thinking? Probably both. On Friday, Sarah brought Marcus a book, a paperback copy of Kitchen Confidential that she'd found at a thrift store. "I thought you might like it," she said. "It's about cooking, but also about, I don't know, finding your place in the world, I guess." Marcus had never been much of a reader, but he promised to look at it. That night, he read the first 3 chapters and found himself thinking about flavor combinations and knife techniques, and what it might be like to work in a real kitchen, not just the assembly line set up at Mel's. By Saturday, Marcus realized he was looking forward to coming to work in a way he hadn't since his first week on the job. It wasn't the work itself. That was still the same mind-numbing routine of chopping vegetables and washing dishes. It was the knowledge that Sarah would be there, that there would be moments of conversation and connection scattered throughout the shift like small gifts. He also realized that his feelings for Sarah had moved beyond simple friendship, though he wasn't sure what to do with that knowledge. She was smart and funny and kind, but she was also running from a dangerous situation and probably not looking for romantic complications. Plus, there was the matter of their respective stations in life. She was a college graduate who'd had a real career, even if it hadn't worked out. He was a community college dropout who washed dishes for minimum wage. But sometimes, when she laughed at something he'd said, or when their hands accidentally touched while passing plates, Marcus allowed himself to imagine that maybe the distance between them wasn't as vast as he thought. On Sunday, Marcus's day off, he found himself at the hardware store buying a proper bike repair kit. He told himself it was just practical, that Sarah would probably need more repairs down the road. But as he stood in the checkout line, he wondered if he was fooling himself about his motivations. His phone buzzed with a text message. He didn't recognize the number, but the message made him smile. "Thanks for everything this week. You've made this place feel less like exile and more like home." Marcus typed back, "Just returning the favor. You made it feel less like prison and more like work." A few minutes later, another message. "See you tomorrow. I'll bring coffee." Marcus saved the number in his contacts under Sarah and headed home, already looking forward to Monday for the first time in recent memory. He was so focused on his thoughts that he almost missed the black pickup truck parked across the street from Mel's as he drove past on his way home. He noticed it only because it seemed out of place, too new and too clean for the neighborhood, and the windows were tinted dark enough that he couldn't see inside. Marcus filed the observation away without thinking much about it. There were a lot of reasons someone might park near the diner. Maybe they were waiting for someone, or using the free Wi-Fi from the truck stop next door. He didn't think about the pickup truck again until Monday evening, when he saw it parked in the same spot. This time, Marcus was walking to his car after his shift, and something about the truck's presence made him uneasy. He couldn't say why, just a feeling that something was off. When he got to his car, Marcus glanced back at the truck. The engine was running. He could see the exhaust in the cold air, but nobody had gotten in or out the entire time he'd been watching. Marcus was reaching for his car door when he heard Sarah's voice behind him. "Marcus, wait up!" He turned to see her jogging across the parking lot, her bike helmet in one hand and a worried expression on her face. "Did you see that truck?" she asked, slightly out of breath. "The black pickup?" "Yeah, I noticed it. Why?" "It's been there for 3 days, same spot, same time. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but..." Sarah trailed off, looking toward the street. Marcus followed her gaze. The pickup truck was gone. Maybe it was nothing. Sarah said, but she didn't sound convinced. Maybe, Marcus agreed, but something cold had settled in his stomach. You want me to follow you home tonight, just to be safe? Sarah looked like she was about to say no, then changed her mind. Yeah, that would make me feel better. Marcus followed Sarah's bike through the quiet streets of Millerville, staying far enough back that he wouldn't crowd her but close enough that he could reach her quickly if something happened. The ride took 20 minutes, longer than it should have because Sarah took a circuitous route, doubling back on herself twice and cutting through a shopping center parking lot. When they reached her apartment complex, a collection of tired-looking buildings that had probably been nice in the 1980s, Sarah waited for Marcus to park before getting off her bike. "Thank you," she said. "I know I'm probably being crazy, but you're not being crazy," Marcus said. "Trust your instincts." Sarah nodded, looking relieved to have her paranoia validated. "I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be there." Marcus waited until Sarah had disappeared into her building before driving home, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sarah had been through enough trauma to recognize real danger when she saw it, and if she thought the pickup truck was worth worrying about, then it probably was. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling of his trailer, listening to his mother's breathing from the next room, and thinking about black pickup trucks and women who had to run from the men they'd once loved. He thought about Sarah's smile and the way she'd hugged him in the parking lot that first night, and about how sometimes the people who needed protecting were the same people who made life worth protecting. Somewhere around 3 a.m., Marcus fell asleep with his phone in his hand, Sarah's number on the screen, ready to call if she needed him. The beginning of the end started on a Tuesday afternoon during the dead zone between lunch and dinner. Marcus was breaking down boxes in the back room when he heard voices coming from the kitchen. Nothing unusual except that one of the voices was deeper than any of the usual staff, with an accent that didn't belong to anyone who worked at Mel's. Marcus stepped out of the back room and immediately understood why Sarah had been worried about the black pickup truck. The man standing near the pass-through window was everything Marcus had expected Derek to be, but somehow worse. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing expensive jeans and a leather jacket that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. His dark hair was styled with the kind of precision that required regular salon visits, and he wore his wealth-like armor. But it was his smile that made Marcus's skin crawl, the kind of smile that said he enjoyed having power over people. Derek was talking to Tommy, the head chef, but his eyes kept scanning the dining room, clearly looking for someone. "Like I said, I'm an old friend of Sarah's," Derek was saying, his voice carrying the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no. "I was in the area and thought I'd surprise her. She around?" Tommy, oblivious to the undercurrents, was nodding along. "Yeah, she's here somewhere. Probably in the break room. Sarah." "No," Marcus said, stepping into the kitchen. Both men turned to look at him. Tommy looked confused. Derek looked annoyed. "Excuse me?" Derek said. "She's not here," Marcus said, meeting Derek's stare directly. "She called in sick." It was a lie, and everyone in the kitchen knew it. Sarah was working her usual shift. Marcus had seen her 20 minutes ago, taking an order from the family at table 12. But something about Derek's presence set off every alarm Marcus possessed. Tommy started to contradict him. "Marcus, what are you talking about? She's..." "Food poisoning," Marcus said loudly, cutting Tommy off. "Really bad. Probably be out for a few days." Tommy looked at Marcus like he'd lost his mind, but Derek's expression had shifted from annoyance to something more dangerous. "That's interesting," Derek said slowly, "because I could have sworn I saw her bike in the parking lot." "Lot of bikes in the world," Marcus replied. Derek smiled, and Marcus understood why Sarah had run. There was something predatory in that smile, something that suggested violence was always just one wrong word away. "You know," Derek said, stepping closer to Marcus, "I don't think we've been introduced. I'm Derek, and you are. Not interested in introductions." Derek's smile widened. "Funny, you know, I've been driving around for a while looking for Sarah. It's amazing how hard it can be to find someone when they don't want to be found. But then I remembered that she always was drawn to projects, broken things that needed fixing." The insult was clear enough, but Marcus didn't take the bait. Instead, he turned to Tommy. "I need to start dinner prep. That new supplier is coming at 4. Tommy, still looking confused but sensing the tension in the room, nodded. "Right. Yeah, you should do that." Derek watched this exchange with obvious amusement. Well, it was nice meeting you, Marcus. I'm sure I'll be seeing you around. He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and implied threats. As soon as Derek was gone, Tommy rounded on Marcus. What the hell was that about? Sarah's not sick, she's in the break room right now. I know, Marcus said. Then why did you… Because that guy's bad news and Sarah doesn't want to see him. Tommy stared at Marcus for a long moment, then shrugged. Above my pay grade, he said, and went back to prepping vegetables. Marcus waited 5 minutes, then walked to the break room. Sarah was sitting at the small table reading a paperback novel and eating an apple. She looked up when he entered, smiling. Hey, she said, I was just… Derek was here, Marcus said. The smile disappeared from Sarah's face so quickly that Marcus felt something break inside his chest. What? She whispered. He came into the kitchen looking for you. I told him you were sick, that you'd called in. Sarah's face had gone pale. Did he believe you? I don't know. Maybe. He saw your bike in the parking lot. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I have to go, she said. Sarah, I have to go, Marcus. Today. Now. If he found me here, he's not going to stop looking. And if he thinks you helped me… She trailed off, but Marcus could fill in the blanks. Where will you go? I don't know, somewhere else, anywhere else. Sarah stood up and grabbed her purse from the back of her chair. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should never have let you get involved in this. I got myself involved, Marcus said, and I'm not sorry about it. Sarah looked at him with something that might have been love or might have been grief. You're a good person, Marcus. Too good for this place. Too good for me. Then don't say that. It's true, you deserve better than a fucked up waitress with psycho ex-boyfriend problems. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that he'd never wanted anything more than he wanted to keep her safe and make her smile. But before he could find the words, Sarah had kissed him quickly on the cheek and walked past him toward the back door. Sarah, wait. But she was already gone, and Marcus was left standing in the empty break room, surrounded by the lingering scent of her shampoo and the weight of all the things he should have said. He went back to work because he didn't know what else to do. He prepped vegetables and washed dishes and tried not to think about Sarah riding her beat-up bike out of town, with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever money she had in her purse. When his shift ended at 10 p.m., Marcus walked out to the parking lot and confirmed what he'd already known. Sarah's bike was gone. So was the black pickup truck. Marcus drove home through the quiet streets of Millerville, past the shuttered stores and the flickering streetlights, and tried to convince himself that this was just a temporary setback, that Sarah would call when she got somewhere safe, that this wasn't the end of whatever had been growing between them. But deep down, he knew better. People like Sarah didn't get happy endings. They got survival if they were lucky, and sometimes not even that. At home, Marcus sat on his front steps and called Sarah's phone. It went straight to voicemail, the generic recording from the phone company, not her voice. He tried again an hour later, then again before he went to bed. The next morning, he called one more time. The number had been disconnected. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of routine and regret. Marcus went to work, did his job, and came home to his trailer and his sick mother and the growing certainty that he'd let something important slip through his fingers. The other staff at Mel's quickly stopped asking about Sarah. Jimmy hired a replacement, a tired-looking woman named Janet who had 3 kids and 2 jobs and no time for conversation during breaks. She was perfectly competent and utterly forgettable, the kind of employee who did her work and went home without leaving any impression on the people around her. Marcus found himself eating lunch alone again, sitting on the back step and staring at the parking lot where he'd first seen Sarah crying over her broken bike. Sometimes he'd catch himself looking for a flash of blonde hair in the dining room, or listening for her laugh during the dinner rush. But Sarah was gone as completely as if she'd never existed, leaving behind only the memory of coffee shared, and stories told, and the brief, bright possibility of something good. Tommy, the head chef, noticed Marcus's mood eventually. One evening during a particularly slow shift, he pulled Marcus aside. "You're moping," Tommy said without preamble. "It's depressing the rest of us." "I'm working," Marcus replied. "You're going through the motions. There's a difference." Tommy leaned against the prep table and studied Marcus with the shrewd eyes of someone who'd seen plenty of heartbreak in his 43 years. "That girl really got to you, didn't she?" Marcus didn't answer, but he didn't need to. "Look, kid," Tommy said, "I've been in this business for 20 years. I've seen servers come and go, seen cooks fall for waitresses, seen waitresses fall for customers, seen more workplace drama than a soap opera. You know what I learned?" "What?" "Most of the time when someone leaves like that, sudden, no forwarding address, no goodbye, they don't come back. Not because they don't want to, but because they can't." Marcus knew Tommy was trying to help, but the words felt like stones in his chest. "You think I should just forget about her? I think you should stop waiting for her to walk back through that door," Tommy said gently. "Because that's not how life works for people like us. We don't get the Hollywood ending where the girl comes back and everything works out. We get what we get, and we make the best of it." That night, Marcus drove past Sarah's old apartment complex on his way home. The windows of her unit were dark, and there was a "For Rent" sign stuck in the brown grass near the parking lot. He sat in his car for a long time, looking up at those dark windows and trying to imagine Sarah somewhere safe, somewhere far from Derek and his black pickup truck. Marcus hoped she'd found work, hoped she'd found a place to live, hoped she'd found people who would look at her the way he had, like she mattered, like she was worth protecting. But hope was a luxury he couldn't afford for very long. Life went on because it had to. Marcus picked up extra shifts when they were available, saving money with the vague idea that someday he might go back to school, might learn to be a real chef instead of just a prep cook who dreamed of better things. His mother's condition stabilized. Not better, but not worse, which felt like a victory of sorts. Winter turned to spring, and Marcus began to accept that whatever he'd felt for Sarah, love, infatuation, the simple human need for connection, was something he'd have to carry alone. She'd left his life as suddenly as she'd entered it, but the impact remained. The book she'd given him sat on his nightstand, and he'd read it twice now, filling the margins with notes about techniques he wanted to try and dishes he wanted to create. It was on a humid Thursday in May, almost 7 months after Sarah had disappeared, that Marcus's life took another unexpected turn. He was working the evening shift, breaking down a delivery of vegetables and listening to the familiar sounds of the dinner rush, when Jimmy approached him with an expression Marcus had never seen before, something that might have been respect. "Marcus," Jimmy said, "there's someone here wants to talk to you." Marcus looked up from the crate of onions he'd been sorting. "About what?" "About a job." The someone turned out to be a woman in her 50s, with steel gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of presence that suggested she was used to being in charge. She wore a simple black dress and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd earned her place in the world through hard work and competence. "Marcus Rodriguez?" she asked, extending her hand. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Chef Margaret Sinclair. I own a restaurant in Savannah, Sinclair's Bistro. I understand you're quite talented." Marcus blinked, wondering if he'd heard correctly. Sinclair's Bistro was the kind of place he'd read about in food magazines. Upscale, innovative, the type of restaurant that attracted food critics and wealthy tourists. What would the owner of a place like that want with a prep cook from Mel's Diner? "I think there's been some mistake," Marcus said. "No mistake. I received a letter about you. Very detailed, very persuasive. The writer seemed to think you had potential that was being wasted here." Chef Sinclair glanced around the kitchen of Mel's with barely concealed disdain. "Based on what I can see, I'm inclined to agree." "A letter? From who?" "Someone who clearly cares about your future." The letter was unsigned, but it included some very specific details about your skills and your situation. It also included this. Chef Sinclair reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Marcus recognized it immediately. It was one of the pages from the notebook where he'd been writing down recipe ideas, the one he'd shown to Sarah during one of their breaks. The page contained his notes for a dish he'd been working on, a fusion of Southern comfort food and Latin flavors that he'd dreamed of serving someday. "The person who sent this seemed to think you were capable of more than prep work," Chef Sinclair continued. "They suggested that with proper training, you could become a real chef. I'm here to find out if they were right." Marcus stared at the notebook page, his mind reeling. Only one person had seen these notes, had listened to him talk about his culinary dreams with anything approaching genuine interest. Sarah, somehow, despite everything that had happened, despite having to run from Derek and start over somewhere new, Sarah had remembered him, had cared enough to write to a chef in Savannah, to advocate for him, to try to give him the opportunity she thought he deserved. "I'd like to offer you a position," Chef Sinclair said, "starting as a line cook, but with the understanding that if you prove yourself, there's room for advancement. The pay is better than what you're making here, and you'd be learning from some of the best chefs in Georgia." Marcus tried to find his voice. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it. I know it's a big decision. You'd have to relocate, leave your family behind. But opportunities like this don't come along often, especially for people without formal culinary training. Chef Sinclair handed him a business card. "Take some time to consider it. If you're interested, call me within the week. We can discuss details, help you make the transition." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Marcus, whoever wrote that letter about you, they believe in you. Don't let them down." After Chef Sinclair left, Marcus stood in the kitchen holding her business card and trying to process what had just happened. Jimmy, who had been hovering nearby and listening to every word, finally spoke up. "Well, shit," Jimmy said. "I guess you're moving up in the world." Marcus looked down at the card, then at the notebook page that Chef Sinclair had returned to him. In the margin, in handwriting he didn't recognize but somehow knew was Sarah's, someone had written, "He's better than he knows. Give him a chance." That night, Marcus called in sick for the first time in 2 years and drove to Savannah. He wanted to see Sinclair's bistro for himself, to understand what Sarah had set in motion. The restaurant was everything he'd imagined and more, elegant but not pretentious, with an open kitchen where he could see the line cooks working with precision and passion. He sat at the bar and ordered a meal he couldn't really afford, tasting flavors that were complex and nuanced in ways that made him understand how much he still had to learn. But as he ate, Marcus also realized that Sarah had been right about him. He could do this. With training and dedication and the kind of opportunity Chef Sinclair was offering, he could become the chef he'd dreamed of being. The decision should have been easy, but it wasn't. Taking the job would mean leaving his mother, leaving the only place he'd ever known, stepping into a world where he'd be starting over at the bottom. It would mean leaving behind the slim possibility that Sarah might someday return to Millerville looking for him. But as Marcus drove home that night, he understood that staying would be a betrayal of everything Sarah had tried to give him. She'd seen something in him that he was only beginning to see in himself, and she'd taken a risk to make sure he had the chance to pursue it. The least he could do was be brave enough to take that chance. Marcus called Chef Sinclair the next morning and accepted her offer. He gave Jimmy 2 weeks' notice, arranged for his mother's care with his aunt in the next town over, and began planning for a future he'd never quite dared to imagine. On his last night at Mel's, Marcus stood in the parking lot where he'd first met Sarah and tried to find the words for everything he was feeling. Gratitude, fear, excitement, loss. They all tangled together in his chest until he could barely breathe. "Thank you," he said to the empty parking lot, to the memory of a woman who'd changed his life and then disappeared from it, for seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me this. The parking lot didn't answer, but Marcus hadn't expected it to. Some gifts came without the giver's presence, offered freely and without expectation of thanks or recognition. As Marcus drove away from Mel's for the last time, he carried with him the hope that somewhere, Sarah was safe and happy and building a new life for herself. He hoped that someday their paths might cross again, and he could tell her in person what her belief in him had made possible. But even if that day never came, Marcus would carry her gift forward, the knowledge that he was capable of more than he'd ever imagined, and the courage to reach for it. Walk 3 years later, Marcus stood in the kitchen of his own restaurant, a small bistro in Charleston that he'd opened with a loan, a business plan, and the kind of determination that came from knowing exactly how far he'd traveled to get there. The place was called Second Chances, and it served the kind of food that told stories, dishes that bridged cultures and backgrounds, that spoke to people who understood what it meant to start over. Marcus had learned everything Chef Sinclair could teach him, then learned more from other chefs, other kitchens, other cities. He'd worked 18-hour days and slept on couches and saved every penny until he could afford his own place. The restaurant was small, just 30 seats, but it was his, and it was exactly what he'd dreamed of during those long nights at Mel's Diner. It was a Tuesday evening in October, during the quiet hour between the dinner rush and closing time, when she walked in. Marcus was expediting orders, calling out modifications to his line cooks and tasting sauces, when he heard the hostess seating someone at table 7. He glanced up automatically. It was a habit he'd developed, keeping an eye on the dining room to make sure everything was running smoothly. The woman sitting alone at table 7 had dark hair instead of blonde, and she was wearing clothes that suggested success rather than survival. But Marcus knew her immediately, knew her in the way you know your own heartbeat, or the sound of your own voice. Sarah. For a moment, Marcus forgot how to breathe. 3 years of wondering, of hoping, of carrying her memory like a talisman, and suddenly she was there, real and present, and reading his menu as if she belonged in his world. Marcus handed off the expediting to his sous chef and walked into the dining room, his heart pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. "Sarah," he said when he reached her table. She looked up and her face broke into the same smile that had made him fall for her all those years ago. But there was something different about her now. A confidence, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Marcus," she said. "I heard you might be here." "You heard right." Marcus gestured to the restaurant around them. "What do you think?" "I think," Sarah said, looking around at the warm lighting and the busy open kitchen and the customers who were clearly enjoying their meals, "that someone took my advice." Marcus laughed, and some of the tension in his chest eased. "Your advice and a lot of hard work. The best kind of advice usually requires both." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Marcus saw in Sarah's eyes the same mix of emotions he was feeling. Joy, nervousness, the weight of time past and words unsaid. "Are you dining alone?" Marcus asked. "I was hoping you might join me, if you have time." Marcus looked back at his kitchen where his staff was handling the last few orders of the evening with practiced efficiency. "I think I can make time." He sat down across from Sarah, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was so much to say that it was hard to know where to start. "You look good," Sarah said finally. "Happy?" "I am, most days." Marcus paused. "What about you? Are you happy?" "Getting there. It took a while, but I'm getting there." "Derek?" "Arrested 2 years ago on drug charges. Turns out the FBI had been watching him for a while. I don't think he'll be bothering anyone for a long time." Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. "I'm glad you're safe." "Me too. It's amazing how much easier it is to build a life when you're not constantly looking over your shoulder." "Where are you living now?" "Atlanta, actually. I went back after Derek was arrested. Got my old job back, then got promoted. I'm a creative director now at a pretty good agency." Sarah smiled. "Turns out running for your life teaches you a lot about resilience and creative problem solving." Marcus grinned. Who knew? They talked for the next hour, filling in the gaps of 3 years. Sarah told him about the places she'd lived, the jobs she'd worked, the slow process of rebuilding her life from scratch. Marcus told her about his time with Chef Sinclair, about the other restaurants where he'd learned his craft, about the terrifying and exhilarating process of opening his own place. As the restaurant emptied around them, and Marcus's staff began closing procedures, Sarah finally asked the question that had been hanging in the air between them. "Why didn't you try to find me?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "Because you left for a reason. Because you needed to disappear, and I figured if you wanted to be found, you'd let me know where to look. And if I hadn't come here tonight, then I would have kept hoping that you were safe and happy somewhere, and I would have been grateful for the time we had." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were warm and steady, nothing like the trembling woman who'd cried in a parking lot 3 years ago. "I wrote that letter to Chef Sinclair because I wanted you to have the chance you deserved," she said. "But I also wrote it because I hoped that someday, when I was ready, I might be able to find you again, and that when I did, you'd be someone I could be proud to know." And Sarah looked around the restaurant, at the clean professional kitchen visible through the pass, at the carefully crafted menu, at the evidence of dreams turned into reality through hard work and determination. "I'm very proud to know you, Marcus Rodriguez." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of old fears and old wounds. "So what happens now?" "I don't know." Sarah said honestly. "I live in Atlanta, you live here. We're both different people than we were 3 years ago. But I'd like to find out, if you're interested." Marcus thought about the long road that had brought him here, from a prep cook washing dishes in a small-town diner to the owner of his own restaurant. He thought about the letter Sarah had written, the leap of faith that had changed his life, the patience it must have taken to wait until she was strong enough to come back. "I'm interested," he said. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Good. Because I was thinking maybe we could start with dinner. Somewhere nice. I hear the chef at this place is supposed to be pretty talented." Marcus laughed. "I'll see what I can do." As they sat there in the empty restaurant, surrounded by the comfortable quiet of a successful evening service, Marcus realized that this was what second chances looked like. Not the grand gesture of a movie ending, but the quiet courage to reach for something good, and the wisdom to appreciate it when it appeared. Outside, Charleston hummed with its usual night sounds, but inside second chances, two people who had once been broken in different ways sat together and planned a future that neither of them could have imagined when they'd first met in a parking lot over a broken bicycle.